ways of controlling the flow of our foam solution and our air. And starting from right to left here, we'll go through the most simple version. When this is pushed all the way in, it's obvious to anyone who's operated a side panel vehicle that in order to get flow traveling out of your discharge, which the discharge isn't shown, this is just your panel mounted control. As you pull this valve out, you get to your dry setting, your foam setting, and then your wet setting. And the further you open it, the more liquid volume you're going to obviously be getting of your water and foam solution. Concurrently, through a set of gears, 2-to-1 reduction gears here on the back, we have a 2-inch Akron ball valve that is wide open when it's in this position and fully closed when it's in this position. But by a use of a smaller gear on a smaller 1/2-inch ball valve that we connect air pressure to one side, and then the output would go into our air injection point for our CAFS. As we begin to open this valve and pull it open, it also quickly begins to open the airflow valve. And if you guys, after we're all done here, if you take a look from the top here, you'll see that that larger gear on the ball valve for the water and foam, it turns, like I said, a ratio of 2-to-1 the airflow valve, so that as this water valve goes from fully closed to fully open, the air valve goes from fully closed to fully open, back to fully closed in the same time it takes this water valve to go from fully closed to fully open. So what we're doing is, as we're traveling through about the halfway point here, our air valve's at the wide open point when the water valve's at its halfway open point. And then when you get to fully open, now our air is shut back off and we've gone through our CAFS settings, and now we're back to pretty much a plain water or water with foam solution. Okay, so that's a real simplistic way through just the use of mechanical gearing that we can achieve our water and our air settings and then going right back to just plain water. The second display here is for if you had a up and down or a side panel control or a top panel control where you want to also control. This in the up position is off, and as you travel the handle down through the wet position, it turns on an electrically fired solenoid switch, which then turns on an air solenoid to inject your air. The air stays at a constant rate at this point.
There's still a couple
through our wet to dry setting.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm sorry, this is closed and this is fully open for water. But as you travel up through that zone, this would be your dry setting, very small amount of water and foam solution. And the more and more you open it, the more liquid you get with that consistent air ratio that's coming in. And when you get up to the fully open position, your air valve goes back off, and now you're calling for basically just plain water or water with foam solution if your foam proportioner is turned on. Incidentally, that's what this switch here is designed to do. I've got a switch here on the top that simulates the foam system being turned on. And the reason I need this is for this component down here to work correctly. When I'm calling for dry CAFS or wet CAFS, it also checks the level of my foam tank to make sure that the foam tank has foam in it and that the foam system's turned on. Otherwise, it doesn't allow you to put water and air into the same line without the foam system being turned on. So it has that slug flow protection built into it to prevent any air and water only from going into a hose line. Because if you saw the video yesterday, and even if you didn't, you have to remember you can never mix plain water and plain air without the foam. Otherwise, you're going to get slug flow. You're going to get a pocket of water followed by a pocket of air, and that slug of water is going to set you back while that pocket of air coming through at the same pressure is going to jump forward, and the nozzle is going to jump in your arm, and the hose under your arm is going to beat on your rib cage and on the inner side of your bicep, and it's not a fun situation to be in. So you always want to make sure you have Class A foam flowing with your water at least 0.3% before you turn on the air. So that's what this little switch here is intended to do, is to show the foam system's turned on. So again, this one's kind of simply stated. You know, you've got a cam in here that's tripping a solenoid, which is turning on the air right through the CAFS range. And then the more water you give it, the more liquid it's going to be, the more wetter foam it's going to be. In the drier setting, the less liquid, the fluffier the foam is going to be. And in this one, it works on that gear action. And then the one on the end, right here, you see it's set currently in the closed position. If I push the button once, it'll light up the air only. If I push it twice, it'll set it to dry CAFS. Push it again, it'll flat wet CAFS. If I push it a fourth time, it'll turn on the water only. If you don't do anything, there's a certain amount of time that goes by and it'll time itself out and it'll just go right back to its whatever position it's in. Okay? But if I want to wet CAFS, I just turn it on, hit the engaged. It senses that there's foam. It opens my water valve to a predetermined section, and then it sets my airflow to a predetermined point. And those are adjustable predetermined points that you can modify after you decide exactly what you want to call wet CAFS and dry CAFS. If now I decide my wet CAFS, I've knocked down the fire, now I want to mop up with dry CAFS, I push the button 4 more times, hit dry CAFS. It opens up, or it backs off my water valve a little bit more. Now I can make the fluffy shaving cream foam for covering the exposure and covering it up so it's got a nice blanket of foam on top of it.
Is that also hooked up to the foam on switch? Said you can't run air and...
That one specifically is hooked up to the foam on switch, so that if you have the foam turned off, like right now, if I ran out of foam, if I flip the switch off saying I've ran out of foam, what's going to happen? My air valve's going to go to off, my water valve's going to go to wide open. Because now as a firefighter, if my CAFS if I'm not running CAFS, I need more liquid. I'm going to shut my air off so I don't get slug flow, and then I'm going to open my water valve up completely and go back to typical water firefighting scenarios.